All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to be exploring something pretty unique. We're diving into the world of a bhikkhu's quest for enlightenment. And get this, snowboarding is involved.
Yeah, was that expected, right?
Totally. We've got these excerpts about this bhikkhu's journey. Plus, we've got a study guide to help us unpack it all. This thing's got quizzes, essay questions, the whole shebang.
Oh, that's great. Those can be really helpful, especially when you're dealing with concepts like emptiness and impermanence, which can be a little tricky.
You're telling me those are major themes in Buddhism, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to make sure we're on the same page, emptiness, it's not about things not existing. It's more about recognizing how everything's connected. Nothing's really independent.
Gotcha, like a giant cosmic web.
Exactly. And then you've got impermanence, the idea that everything is in constant flux, like nothing stays the same.
Right, always changing. Okay, so we meet this bhikkhu, and he's all about renunciation. He even describes it as pure and white, almost like some kind of prize possession. But isn't that kind of contradictory? Like, isn't the whole point to detach from stuff, even stuff that seems good, like renunciation? What do you think?
That is a really sharp observation. And it really gets to the heart of what this bhikkhu's going through. He's not just trying to collect emptiness like it's some spiritual reward. Renunciation for him, it's more like a starting point. It's like a tool to break free from those attachments he's talking about.
So he can get to that deeper understanding of emptiness.
Exactly.
So it's more about making space in your mind than the emptiness itself.
You could say that, yeah, like clearing out the clutter to make room for something new.
Okay, that makes sense. And this is where the snowboarding comes in, right? Like, at first I thought it was just a random detail, but I have a feeling there's more to it than meets the eye.
Oh, absolutely. The snowboarding analogy. It probably represents how this bhikkhu is engaging with his own mind. You know how when you're snowboarding down an empty slope, you're not just passively there?
Yeah, you're carving your own path.
Right. So it's kind of like that. You know, he's actively navigating the terrain of his own mind. He's trying to take the place of consciousness, the place of nothingness, as he puts it.
Wow, that's deep. So he's not just observing his thoughts, he's actively shaping them, like a mental snowboarder.
Precisely. It's about really knowing your inner landscape, learning to ride the waves of those thoughts and emotions without getting swept away.
I like that analogy. Okay, so now we get to this super vivid metaphor about purifying gold. And the bhikkhu, he goes into all these details about the process. It's like really specific. And I'm kind of wondering, how does this tie into his quest for enlightenment? What's your take?
Oh, it's a powerful image. You know how raw gold has to go through all this smelting and purifying to really shine? Well, the bhikkhu, he's using meditation, kind of like that smelting process, to refine his mind. He wants to reach a state of clarity and purity.
So it's like we all have this potential inside us, but it needs some work. Just like refining that gold, we got to use mindfulness and introspection, polish our own inner gold.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not about reaching some perfect static state either.
So it's more about always working on yourself.
Exactly. It's a continuous process. Just like gold can always be refined further, so can the mind.
So it's like the journey itself is the refining fire. Okay, now this is where things start to get really interesting. The bhikkhu stumbles upon this concept of the 4 colorless places, and he has this huge realization about their impermanent nature. Now, before we get lost in the jargon, what exactly are these 4 colorless places?
Well, they probably refer to some advanced states of meditation, something called jhanas. They're often described as states of deep concentration and peace. Like, imagine being totally absorbed in something, completely free from distractions.
Yeah.
That's kind of what they're like.
Sounds pretty blissful, but they're not permanent. I mean, that's kind of unsettling, isn't it? Especially for someone who's dedicated their life to reaching these states.
You're right, it is unsettling. But this is a huge turning point for the bhikkhu. It's like he suddenly realizes that everything, even these incredible states of mind, are subject to change. Nothing stays fixed forever.
Wow, that's a heavy realization. So far, he's embraced renunciation, he's actively working with his mind and refining it, and now he's figured out that even those super refined states, they don't last. What happens next?
That's where things get even more fascinating. Buckle up, because in part 2, we're going to explore how this bhikkhu grapples with this whole idea of universal impermanence. We'll see how he dives even deeper into the nature of our senses to find true liberation.
Welcome back. It's wild to think that even these, would you call them jhanas? Even those blissful meditation states are temporary.
It's a bit like climbing a mountain you think is going to be solid rock and finding out it's made of sand,
Yeah, always shifting. So where does that leave our bhikkhu? What's his next move?
Well, this is where he starts really investigating our senses. He starts analyzing how every sensation pops up, hangs around for a bit, and then bam, it's gone.
So instead of like clinging to those blissful states, he's looking at the very foundation of experience itself, the senses. Is that it?
Exactly. To really get this, it helps to imagine living like a bhikkhu, stripping away all those distractions we deal with every day. Those little details of experience, they become super clear.
That makes sense.
And that's where he goes deep, dissecting how these sensations come and go, especially sound, hearing.
Yeah, I remember reading those excerpts. It was intense, like so much detail about the ear and different kinds of sounds. Why so focused on ears? Was there something about sound that was like extra helpful?
It's not really about ears specifically. It's more using them as an example to understand, well, how fleeting everything is. Every single sensory experience.
Right.
By breaking down how sound appears, how long it lasts, how it disappears, he's getting this like core understanding of impermanence.
So it's like using a microscope on your own experience, huh? Does this mean he's trying to stop those sensations altogether?
No, not really. It's not shutting them down, but more like changing how we relate to them,
Okay, I'm listening.
Think of it this way. Imagine you're craving, I don't know, a big slice of chocolate cake. Instead of giving in right away, or like beating yourself up for wanting it. You just sit with that craving. You feel it. You notice how it rises and falls, how it eventually fades away.
Interesting.
That's kind of the detachment he's practicing.
Not getting caught up in the feeling, just observing it.
You got it. And it's not just good feelings either. He does this with the unpleasant stuff too. Even neutral stuff, recognizing that none of it defines him, that it's all temporary.
Right, because it's all impermanent, like we were talking about before. It's like, by understanding that everything changes, the good and the bad, he's breaking free from that cycle of wanting and rejecting, that stuff the sources mention about what causes suffering.
Precisely. It's like he's realizing that real freedom isn't about chasing those good vibes or running away from the bad ones. It's about seeing that they're both ultimately temporary.
This reminds me of what you were saying before, how emptiness isn't about nothingness, but about interconnectedness.
Oh, absolutely. By seeing that everything is impermanent, he's also starting to grasp that web of connections. How every experience relies on so many factors. Nothing's really separate.
So he's seeing the bigger picture now, not just each sensation by itself.
Yeah. It's like he's zooming out from that microscope and seeing the whole, the interdependence of everything.
Okay, I'm seeing the pieces come together now. Renunciation leads to deeper mental exploration. Then he bumps into the impermanence of even those amazing meditative states. Then he dives deeper into the senses, right? And that leads him to see that it's all temporary and connected. What's next? Where does this take him?
That is the big question, isn't it? And to get the answer, well, we'll have to dive into the final part of our deep dive. Stick around as we explore how this new perspective, this big shift, how it paves the way for real liberation.
Welcome back to the deep dive. It's crazy how much we've uncovered just by following this bhikkhu's journey. We started with him renouncing everything, then we saw him analyzing his senses, and then the big revelation that even those blissful states, they don't last either. So now the question is, how does all this lead to liberation? I mean, does it?
The key, right? It's not just about the knowledge. It's about how understanding this actually changes how we live. This bhikkhu story, it's like a roadmap for us, even if we're not living in a monastery or anything.
So how do we use this roadmap? What's the first step?
Well, it starts with being mindful, being present with whatever we're experiencing without judging it. Remember how the bhikkhu was so careful about observing his senses? We can do that too.
You mean instead of getting carried away by all those thoughts and feelings that pop up, we just notice them?
Yeah. Just let them come and go. Like imagine you're stuck in traffic, right? Instead of getting all tense and frustrated, you just notice it. You feel that tightness in your shoulders. You see those impatient thoughts, but you don't judge them. You just let them be.
Just being aware of it all. I can see how that would make those annoying situations a little easier.
Exactly. And as we practice this, we start to see how much we suffer because we're clinging to stuff that's always changing,
Like chasing those good feelings and pushing away the bad ones.
Right. And that just keeps us stuck in this cycle of wanting and not wanting. Remember what the sources said about that causing suffering?
Yeah, it all comes back to that, doesn't it?
It does. The bhikkhu, he saw that by letting go of that clinging, accepting things as they are, that's where real freedom is.
It's like what we talked about before, how impermanence can actually be liberating, even though it seems kind of scary at first.
It is a big shift in perspective. It's realizing that fighting change, trying to hold on to things, that's what causes the suffering. But when we accept that everything changes, well, that's where we can find some peace.
This is all really making me think, but it's not about just giving up, is it? The bhikkhu wasn't passive, he was really working at it.
You're right, it's not passive at all. He was actively paying attention, observing his mind. He shows us that liberation is not something that just happens. We got to work at it. Be mindful.
But there's a balance, right? Because we're learning to accept that everything changes, but we're also actively working with our minds, like you said before, refining them like gold.
That's a great point. It's not about just sitting back and watching. It's about being engaged, but in a mindful way. It's like, have you ever seen a really good surfer? They're not fighting the waves, they're working with them. That's what this is about.
Wow, I love that analogy. This whole deep dive has been amazing. We started with a bhikkhu on a quest and ended up talking about the nature of reality itself and how to be free. I feel like I've learned so much.
And remember, this is just the start. Understanding all this, it's a lifelong journey, but it's definitely worth it.
So for everyone listening out there, if a bhikkhu can find wisdom in a snowy mountain, maybe we can find it in our everyday lives too, right? It's about paying attention, letting go, and finding that peace within all the chaos. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.